At 3:15 a.m., the radar screens in Tehran lit up with triumph. They had just fired 215 missiles at the USS Gerald R. Ford. They believed they had checkmated a superpower, but they made a fatal calculation error. They were playing 1980s chess. The United States was playing a 2030s video game. By the time you finish this sentence, the U.S. Space Force has already signed their death warrant. Here is exactly what happens in the 44 minutes that follow. Take a deep breath and look closely at the pitch-black waters of the Strait of Hormuz. To the naked eye, it is silent. But in the electromagnetic spectrum, the air is screaming. 215 lethal streaks of fire have just shredded the horizon from the Iranian coastline. Tehran has just committed an act that history will remember as a collective suicide note. They have launched a full-scale ballistic missile and kamikaze drone strike directly at the most critical military stronghold in the Middle East. The clerics in Tehran are celebrating. They believe they have engineered a 21st century Pearl Harbor. They dream of a $13 billion supercarrier engulfed in flames, of F-35 stealth ghosts reduced to smoldering scrap metal. A saturation attack they believe no defense can withstand. But there's a brutal truth that their arrogance has blinded them to. The very second Iran's first missile cleared its launch rail, the countdown for the existence of Iran's entire military capability began. America does not panic. America does not negotiate. While Iran's warheads are still struggling through the stratosphere, the God's eye of the U.S. Space Force has already locked onto them. In exactly 4 seconds, the death warrant is signed. What you are about to witness is not a fair fight. It is a technological purge, a display of power so brutal, so cold, and so absolute that it strikes terror into the soul of any adversary. Welcome to the 44-minute war. Look at the geopolitical map of the world and pause at the narrowest point of the Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz. This is not merely a waterway. It is the jugular vein of the global economy, where 20% of the world's oil flows every day. And on this fateful night, the minds in Tehran decided to tighten this jugular with the most insane act in modern military history. They called it Operation Persian Storm, a name that sounds heroic, but in reality, it was nothing more than an obituary written in the red ink of stupidity. In the underground missile silos deep within the Zagros Mountains, the chaos began. 45 Shahab, 3 medium-range ballistic missiles, 60 legacy Fateh, 110 anti-ship cruise missiles, and a swarm of 110 Shahid kamikaze drones were pushed out of their bunkers. A total of 215 targets. Tehran calculated that by launching a massive volume of assets simultaneously, they could create a blind spot in the American Aegis system. They believed these 215 mosquitoes could bring down an armored mammoth guarding the waters. Their delusion reached its peak as the commanders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps stood in damp command centers, confident they held the destiny of the world in their hands. But they forgot one minor detail. They were using 1970s tactical logic to confront a superpower operating with the artificial intelligence and orbital weaponry of 2030. Tehran's biggest mistake was not attacking, but attacking the most heavily defended spot on the planet. The Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group is not just a group of ships. It is a floating fortress shielded by 4 Arleigh Burke baseline 10 destroyers, 2 upgraded Ticonderoga-class cruisers, and support from tactical satellites. Imagine you are an Iranian missile commander. You had just pressed the fateful red button, believing you have dealt a lethal blow to the American empire's Achilles heel. You watch through the screens as tens of tons of steel and high explosives tear through the night sky. Your heart is filled with a hollow pride. But there is a cold reality that your outdated brain cannot process. The very millisecond the first heat bloom escaped the exhaust of a Shahab 3 missile, your fate was no longer in your hands. It belonged to a cold entity gliding 35,000 kilometers above your head. Welcome to the era of the United States Space Force. In the eternal darkness of Earth's orbit, the SPIRS, or Space-Based Infrared System Satellite Network, never blinks. They do not need permission to see death sprouting from Iranian soil. When the first plume of fire erupted at the Kermanshah base, hypersensitive sensors captured that signal instantly. In exactly 4 seconds, those tiny streaks of light on radar screens in Colorado and Maryland were confirmed as a large-scale missile attack. Tehran believed they were playing a game of hide and seek in the dark. But in reality, they were standing naked under the blinding floodlights of a space superpower. Automated algorithms took only a single breath to analyze trajectories, speeds, and projected impact points. The results flashed on the command screens of the USS Gerald R. Ford with centimeter-perfect precision. Target: Strait of Hormuz. Count: 215. Time to impact: imminent. While Iranian soldiers were still busy cheering for their so-called successful launch, the atmosphere inside the Combat Direction Center of the USS Gerald R. Ford remained terrifyingly still. There was no panic, no shouting, only the clicking of keyboards and the cold, measured voices of Aegis system operators. For the Americans, this was not a fight for survival. It was a data processing problem, where the final answer is always the humiliating failure of the attacker. But before the kinetic fireworks begin, something even more terrifying happens in the invisible spectrum. While the world focuses on the missiles in the air, the Iranian Navy attempts a sneaky, asymmetric move underwater. They attempt to deploy a swarm of Ghadar-class mini-subs and autonomous underwater vehicles directly beneath the hulls of passing civilian oil tankers. These predators use the massive engine noise of the merchant ships as a physical and acoustic shield. Searching for a mini-submarine under the shadow of a giant oil tanker is like trying to hear a mosquito buzzing in the middle of a blazing rock concert. If the U.S. mistakenly fires on the tanker, a global environmental and economic catastrophe would erupt immediately. This is where Iran attempts to use civilians as human shields for their final blow. However, the U.S. Navy has anticipated this. From the deck of the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, 2 MH-60 are Seahawk anti-submarine helicopters cut through the emerging fog. They deploy a dense network of passive sonar buoys around the oil tanker formation. Instead of traditional algorithms, the Seahawk's processing system uses a fusion algorithm to strip away thousands of layers of noise. They perform acoustic surgery. They map the entire seabed with supercomputer hearing. Realizing the acoustic trap is being deciphered, the Iranian Naval Command tries to lock on. But the USS Delbert D. Black, a Flight 3 destroyer, employs acoustic signature masking. By adjusting the flow around its propellers and activating simulated acoustic devices, the destroyer creates an acoustic ghost. It leads the enemy to believe the American ship has changed course and is in a completely different location several miles away. Iran thinks they're closing in, but in reality, they're chasing a digital illusion created by the U.S. The hunter has officially become the hunted without even knowing it. Back in the skies, the 215 aerial targets are approaching the terminal phase. The waters of the Strait of Hormuz no longer hold the blackness of night. They are torn apart by hundreds of brilliant white fire trails screaming into the sky. This is not a desperate resistance. It is a display of absolute precision. The Aegis Baseline 10 system on the USS Gerald R. Ford and its escorting destroyers has awakened. For the uninitiated, Aegis is not just radar software. It is a digital god of war, capable of coordinating thousands of interceptors simultaneously with a margin of error the size of a fingernail. Look at the pathetic state of the Iranian missile force. 45 Shahab. 3 missiles are plunging from the edge of the atmosphere at hypersonic speeds, believing gravity and velocity will help them breach any barrier. They were wrong. From the Mark 41 vertical launch systems, the space assassins known as SM-3 Block IIA have cleared their rails. The SM-3 doesn't need explosives. It destroys targets with pure kinetic energy. A direct head-on collision at thousands of miles per hour, turning Tehran's pride into weaponized dust in the upper stratosphere. This is not interception. It is a physical purge. Meanwhile, at lower altitudes, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers are performing a symphony of death. The SBY-6 radars, 30 times more powerful than previous generations, are locking on a 60 Fateh, 110 cruise missiles like locking on a ducks in a bathtub. SM-6 missiles scream away, twisting like high-tech pythons, actively seeking and crushing every single target. Explosions roar over the sea. Every Iranian missile shot down is a slap in the face to the strategists in Tehran. And let's not forget the swarm of 110 Shahid drones, what Iran advertises as the terror of the West. As they approach the 20-mile buffer zone, they don't encounter fighter jets. They encounter a wall of molten metal. The Phalanx CIWS and RIM 116 rolling airframe missile systems begin to speak. Listen to the roar of the meat grinder. Burp. For 1,500 rounds of 20mm lead per minute. 6 CRAM systems create a dense wall of metal, sweeping away everything in its path. It isn't defense, it is a sentencing. The cheap drones are torn to shreds, falling into the Persian Gulf like insect carcasses after an electromagnetic storm. But the U.S. Navy has a smarter solution than just bullets. High above the strait, 2 EA-18G Growlers have established a high-gain digital tether. They aren't just flooding the airwaves with white noise. They're performing a spectral autopsy on the swarm's control links. Utilizing machine-assisted signal processing, the U.S. Navy identifies the exact timing intervals keeping the drones synchronized. The American electronic warfare specialists don't need to hijack every drone. They only have to corrupt 15% of the data packets. The results are catastrophic. As the corrupted packets hit the drone's mission computers, the swarm begins to experience a total mission desync. Hundreds of millions of dollars of autonomous hardware begin to drift aimlessly, misrouting their flight paths and colliding with one another in midair. To the Iranian operators, it looks like a Lazarus virus is spreading through their network. The result of the saturation attack that Tehran spent years preparing? 215 targets launched. 215 targets crushed into ash before they could even glimpse the mass of the American ships. Not a single scratch on the hull of the Gerald R. Ford. Not a single American serviceman spilled blood. Tehran threw everything they had at an impenetrable firewall. And now, having played all their trash cards, they realize they are standing naked before the muzzle of an awakened giant. It is now 3:20 a.m. In American military doctrine, there is an unalterable rule. You never get a second chance after daring to fire at Uncle Sam. While Iranian radars were still scanning in vain for traces of their pulverized missiles, the death warrant for the entire military network was approved at U.S. Central Command. Look at this terrifying efficiency. America does not wait for damage assessments. America does not wait for meaningless diplomatic explanations. The moment the enemy's attack trajectory was confirmed, Operation Hormuz Hellfire was officially activated. This was not a proportional retaliation. It was a total neurological excision of Iran's every aggressive capability. Within minutes, the flight deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford became a living hell for the enemy. 48 F-35C Lightning IIs and F/A-18 Super Hornets roared, catapulting into the darkness with weapon bays filled to the brim with super precision guided munitions. Each aircraft carried Tehran's nightmare: Stormbreaker smart bombs, HARM anti-radiation missiles, and JSOW cruise missiles. That is 192 high-tech weapons from the fighter force alone. But that was just the opening act. Tehran's true nightmare came from invisible ghosts. 3B-21 Raider strategic bombers, the pinnacle of 21st century stealth technology, had been gliding over Iranian skies long before any radar could detect them. Carrying 72 JSSMER stealthy cruise missiles, each B-21 is a mobile death sentence, capable of erasing 24 strategic targets simultaneously from hundreds of miles away. And deep beneath the cold waters of the Persian Gulf, 6 Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines went into action. Vertical launch tubes snapped open. 250 Tomahawk Block V cruise missiles tore through the water's surface, forming lethal smoke trails headed straight for Iran's command centers and weapon depots. What is the disparity in war fighting philosophy here? While Iran used 215 legacy missiles hoping for a miracle, America responded with a firestorm of 1,850 precision weapons. America does not strike to send a message. America strikes to ensure the enemy can never send another message through force again. Before the first bomb even touched the ground, the U.S. military performed a frontal lobotomy on Iran's entire defense system. This is the moment when the art of electronic warfare speaks, turning the enemy's most advanced equipment into harmless toys. At 3:25 a.m., while Iranian air defense commanders were still struggling to explain why their missiles disappeared, darkness enveloped them. Not the darkness of the night, but the darkness of absolute technical blindness. 12 EA, 18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft, the wizards of the sky, closed in on the coast. In an instant, every enemy radar screen became a mess of useless white noise. Their air defense systems, the S-300 batteries or the local clones that Iran once bragged about, suddenly became blinded blocks of iron. Following close behind the jamming was the nightmare known as harm. 128 of the latest generation anti-radiation missiles were launched. They don't need a guide. They simply sniff out radar waves and home in like frenzy hounds. In less than 120 seconds, Iran's early warning network within a 300-kilometer radius fell completely silent. Broadcasting stations were blown apart. Control centers were fried by electromagnetic energy. Now the Iranian sky was an open door, and the American giant was stepping through with a sledgehammer in hand. The surgery was a resounding success. Iran's military nervous system has been completely severed. No communication, no radar, no unified command. The entire enemy military is now just dead cells twitching in despair before the actual rain of steel falls. And then the hammer falls. 1,850 American precision weapons begin finding their addresses with unshakable cruelty. The Karamabad base, which had just proudly launched missiles, is the first to be liquidated. Stealth cruise missiles from the B-21 Raiders turn this place into a living hell. Mobile launchers are vaporized. Command centers collapse like sandcastles. Fuel depots erupt into thick black smoke plumes clearly visible from orbit. At the Kermanshah complex, Tomahawk missiles penetrate the most fortified underground bunkers. Did Iran really think a few meters of concrete could protect them from the power of Uncle Sam? A fatal mistake. American penetrator warheads turn missile storage facilities into giant ovens. The entire complex is erased from the military map in a single pass. But remember, the wrath of a superpower never stops at the ruins of the present. The Americans are conducting a root and branch purge. They are erasing the future of an entire missile nation right under the blazing night sky. While the dust from the military bases has yet to settle, the F-35C Lightning IIs have silently penetrated deep into the Iranian heartland. These ghosts do not need the darkness to hide. Their technology simply turns every enemy defense effort into a cheap joke. The targets this time? The production facilities in Isfahan and Persian. This is where Tehran has spent decades and billions of dollars building their dream of hegemony. But under the sights of 96 Stormbreaker smart bombs, they're all just static targets awaiting Judgment Day. Every assembly line, every expensive piece of machinery used to build missiles has been turned into twisted heaps of scrap. America is not just destroying their weapons, they're destroying the very capability to build them. Tehran will not be able to produce a single missile for at least 50 years to come. This is a total technical and industrial erasure. And when the venerable B-52 Stratofortresses appear in the sky, that is when the symphony of destruction reaches its finale. 288 GPS-guided bombs rain down like a storm of judgment on 12 logistics airfields and 8 strategic refineries supplying fuel for the missile program. Look at those massive pillars of fire. They burn so intensely that seismic sensors record tremors equivalent to a magnitude 4 earthquake. This is no longer war. This is a brutal military deprogramming. Look at the numbers to see the savage disparity. 215 Iranian missiles in exchange for 1,850 American precision weapons. 3,400 Iranian military personnel dead, while America suffered 0 fatalities. 18 major military bases and 52 supporting facilities have been completely erased. The entire missile program that Tehran spent decades carefully constructing has turned to ash in less than an hour. That is the price of daring to touch the dragon's tail. A total, humiliating, and irreversible collapse. It is 3:59 a.m., a mere 44 minutes since the first Iranian missile cleared its rail. Look at the clock and feel the brutality of time. In less time than it takes to play a single half of a football match, a nation lost the entire strategic military potential it spent half a century building. Operation Hormuz Hellfire has concluded, but its aftershocks will rock Tehran for generations to come. Iran's 215 missiles, their final hope to challenge American hegemony, transformed into the most expensive joke in history. 215 targets shredded in midair. Not a single scratch on the armor of the American superpower. This was not a war. This was a message written in fire and steel. America has proven to the world that the gap between a regional power and a global superpower is not measured in miles, but in technological supremacy and the will to annihilate. Tehran wanted a Pearl Harbor, but they only received a death warrant. The arrogance of the clerics led their military into an inescapable meat grinder. Now, as the gun smoke drifts away over the Strait of Hormuz under the rising dawn, a cold reality remains. Never touch the dragon's tail of the United States. Never mistake restraint for weakness. Because when the American hammer falls, it does not stop until the enemy is nothing more than a historical footnote on stupidity. The lesson is simple. When you challenge a superpower, you aren't just betting against their military. You are betting against your own existence. 44 minutes to erase a missile empire. 44 minutes to redefine the world order. What do you think of this brutal American retaliatory power? Would any nation dare to repeat Iran's mistake? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to witness more displays of ultimate military might, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Victory belongs to the strongest.